Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today. And apologies that we're getting started just a couple minutes behind the hour. So I appreciate you hanging with us. It is completely my fault. So I will take that one. Well, we have a really exciting conversation today. I am so pleased to introduce our panelists. We are talking about how top brands are driving growth with TV in a challenging market, which I think is relevant to everyone today, whether you're a smaller emerging brand or you're an enterprise brand in the space. This is a topic that continues to come up again and again and again. So before we jump into the panel questions, just a couple of housekeeping items. There's a chat on your screen. Demio allows a really interactive engagement, and that's how we love to handle these webinars at Rockerbox. So if you have questions throughout the presentation, please drop them right in the chat. We'll pause and take those as we go. We're not going to wait till the end to take all the questions or anything like that. If there's something that you want one of the panelists or myself to dig a little bit deeper into, go ahead and drop it there and we'll address the questions as they come. We want to keep this really light and conversational. This is a time for us to really go deep on this topic. So we appreciate you entertaining with us. So before we jump into the questions, I am going to quickly introduce our panelists. So I'm Ashley McAlpin. I'm our head of marketing here at DV Rockerbox. I will kind of bring a bit of the measurement angle to play here as we go through the questions. I'm going to pass it over. Oh, and I am so sorry, Josh. Your title got messed up. This is Josh. This is not.
Title's correct.
The title is correct. The name is incorrect. So Josh, I'm going to pass it to you, and apologies about that.
All good, Ashley. Thank you. I'm Josh Pico. I'm the Senior Vice President of Media for Direct Avenue. Direct Avenue, we're a performance marketing agency. We've got a collective, probably 50 plus years in the industry between leadership. We've been in this space for a long, long time. So we've seen a lot of evolution, a lot of change. And I think today's topics are not only relevant today, they're relevant yesteryear. These challenges that we're experiencing haven't just popped up, right? TV measurement in general has always been a challenge. And so we'll dive into some of those deeper questions, and hopefully the audience has some engaging thoughts that we can help them understand.
Awesome. Thank you, Josh. And Armin, would you like to give yourself a quick overview?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Armin Rostamian. I'm the founder and chief innovation officer of SmartData Analytics and AI. We're helping brands turn their data into growth drivers. And so we focus in bridging that marketing, finance, and AI gap to ultimately build systems to help teams make faster, better data-focused decisions across their entire marketing funnel. And so my background is in marketing intelligence and analytics. I've led both in-house and as a consultant, the measurement function for large consumer brands to small startups that are just getting started. And I think TV and CTV have a big place across that entire spectrum of organizations. And so, I'm excited to share some perspective from both the enterprise and mid-market advertisers to see how they blend CTV into their measurable results.
Awesome. Thank you both. All right. So I think we'll just dive right in with question number one. So we're seeing some industries scale spend while others are tightening budgets. And I think this is actually something that Josh, your team at Direct Avenue, has really pressed into a lot over the last couple of quarters. So how are you advising brands on your side, Josh, to navigate this split economy? I think you guys actually coined it in one of your blog posts that we'll send out after this, when deciding where to lean in or where to pull back when it comes to TV investment.
Yeah. So today there's no one size fits all, right? There's no universal playbook anymore. A long time ago, you could just kind of buy GRPs and buy this mass awareness campaign, and your results would just kind of come to you, right? The old adage of half my marketing is working, I just don't know which half, is more important now than ever before. So I'll say it again, there's just no universal playbook. Every campaign has its own unique business outcome goals, KPIs, audience targeting. So we have to look at each scenario case by case. And those that are targeting, you know, an older demographic, this is a linear TV reach and mass awareness play. Connected television is supplemental to that. There are incremental audiences, albeit a lot smaller. There's still ways to reach people on all these platforms if you're an enterprise company and buying to sort of a brand metric or a CPM or a GRP. On the flip side, you think about younger audiences, those are difficult to find in linear TV. I'm not saying they're non-existent, they're just much harder to find. And so, you know, we're using connected television for more precision of going after those younger age audiences. And these all come together in an attribution scenario. There's an important underlying theme here, and I want to call it unified measurement, right? It's about knowing what your KPI goals are, having all your channels of responses aligned and defined very clearly. So many times we run into challenges with brands that have a defined goal for Google that might be different from Meta and different from television, and that creates additional complexities. So I think when we're in the split economy and we have different levels of brands, we have to think about an audience first approach. Who is your core consumer? Where do they consume content? And how do you measure your business? Let's put all this stuff sort of in a hopper and figure out what the strategies are that make the most sense for that brand. So I'll close my statement with just saying it's a case-by-case scenario. Aligning the media mix with key objectives, business KPIs, and audience targeting is what dictates how an advertiser should engage in this media space.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Armin, what's kind of your POV here?
Yeah, and I think Josh's perspective that you can't buy your way to success is really critical. And it's an interesting time, and it's an opportunity for marketers to be really innovative. And so in the hopper that Josh referenced, I think for each component of that, there's a unique approach and a opportunity to really maximize with the smartest idea, not the idea that's backed with the most dollars. And so, you know, as we look at industries, yeah, there's a shift, and some industries have a better opportunity, but within all industries, there's particular companies doing it well and figuring out how to navigate within their all-encompassing media spend, the role that linear and CTV could contribute. And it's an exciting chance, because I think with a lot of the innovation that we've seen in AI and in other areas, the barrier of entry has really been eliminated for mid-market and smaller companies to enter into this space with smaller dollars or smaller investment in creative generation and all that. So I think it's a really great opportunity to treat this volatility as an opportunity and ultimately be smart about reallocating your resources rather than retreating.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. Go ahead, Josh.
You mentioned volatility, Armin, and I think from a media perspective, volatility is so true. It creates opportunity oftentimes, right? When you have brands that might be pulling back or leaning out of media, it kind of frees up some economical inventory, right? And CPMs are reactive to that. So on the media space side, it's an interesting thing, because these enterprise companies are negotiating so hard in the upfronts. They're really being, you know, they're holding the network's feet to the fire, negotiating down CPM and being aggressive. That puts the networks into a liability scenario oftentimes, where they've got to run additional impressions to deliver the goals, to meet the goals of some of these deals. And that eats into performance inventory, right? So that makes the smaller companies, the mid-market companies, more stressed in terms of what they're paying to get that remnant inventory or that performance level pricing inventory. So, you know, as we kind of navigate through quarters, we see that volatility kind of ebbing and flowing. Some quarters and some months are more opportunistic in pricing, and it's a direct correlation to what is the demand, what's being put into market from the bigger guys in the upfront space. So very, very solid point. And, you know, that's why you have to have a really keen eye on who your core consumer is. Who are we going after? What is the cost effectiveness of reaching that audience? And how does this all wash out in my business outcomes? I think that's the best way brands should think about engaging in this space.
Yeah, 100%. I think, like, from a Rockerbox perspective, we're seeing that the brands who are navigating this kind of economy are the ones that are letting that data and not just the sentiment guide their spending decisions. And it's the people who are looking at the true incremental value of their TV investment, whether that's through, spike analysis for linear or IP-based exposure for CTV. Like there are different ways that we see these brands that we're measuring these for brands. But I think like the level of transparency that is available when measuring TV, especially CTV today, it really allows marketers to make kind of I'd almost say like a surgical level decision and where to lean in, where to pause, kind of like how to shift their budgets between, Josh, what you're talking about with like the awareness driving, and then also those like really the true performance driving media. And I think that's something that's relatively gaining speed, right, over the last couple of years. And so I think, in other words, like today, the best advice is like, you don't have to guess. Like this isn't guesswork of like, well, maybe it's working. Like there's some brand, there's a halo effect, whatever. The data is going to tell you which of your investments are actually moving the needle, which is why it's so important to both partner with a partner who's going to be kind of like placing your ads effectively, and also like making sure you're measuring those with a third party.
Absolutely.
All right. So question number 2, linear TV specifically continues to deliver unmatched reach and credibility, while CTV provides precision and measurable outcomes, like I was just talking about. So how are brands determining the right balance between the two? And Armin, I'd love kind of your point of view here.
Yeah, I think the interesting component to CTV, as you mentioned, is this precision and measurability, which allows, I think, for a big opportunity in testing. And so one of the ways that I've helped brands utilize both CTV and linear TV is to begin on CTV and have targeted either geographic or demographic testing with creatives that are less expensive to create. And so that way you come in and you go shallow on your test, but you go really wide with the messaging and the creative angle that you're taking. And so that allows you to hone in on the type of creative that you want on the biggest screen of the house. And so then you go out and you invest in the production grade, like quality creative, once you've kind of honed in on that exact messaging. So Gen AI, better on static, but getting there on video ads really gives you a chance to cast that wide net, do that testing on CTV, hone in on the message and creative, and then double down on linear on that reach that we know it's so powerful at. So, playing that game is an exciting one for smaller companies too, because it removes the barrier, like I was mentioning earlier. And I think the last component is, we love the precision, and Rockerbox is very helpful in distilling down the outcomes for linear TV as well. But the feedback loop is slower. So, which means you have to wait longer, which means you have to invest a little bit more. So using CTV and that quick turnaround, that agility really does help in making the right type of bet on linear.
Josh, I'd love your kind of overlay on that.
Yeah. So linear provides mass reach, trust, right? It's got credibility, we'll say. CTV is more about precision and more about audience targeting and real-time optimizations, even without humans doing the optimizations. There's a balance. And so there's no one size fits all. The future is an orchestration of them, right? It's not a either or conversation. This is about how do they work together. Armin made a really strong point about creative iterations and generative AI. You can have different creative call to actions, offers, just kind of overlaid or inlaid in one single creative concept. So you can test price points, you can test call to actions, you can even iterate on creative concepting for different audience targeting. In a space where we have a very defined audience in CTV, we can create ads that speak to those consumers and then test out on an A/B split format, or however we want to do it, different offers and price points and calls to action. So I think it's much cheaper to use to use connected television to understand what creatives resonate with my consumer. Once you have those learnings, then you can kind of blow it out into a bigger scaled reach buy. However, that measurability is important in the early phases. Generally, we're looking for signal, not bottom of funnel, return on ad spend, right? It's not about revenue. It's just about at the top of the funnel, which of these creatives against these cohorts are driving more engagement? And let's take that information using measurement platforms and double down and keep reiterating on test.
Yeah.
You want to think about this as a champion and a challenger perspective. If we have a champion creative or cohort audience group, whatever it may be, how do we test against it and always see how we can raise the bar? I think that's the role between linear and CTV is understanding that CTV is a much lower engagement cost. You can target down to the individual level. It gives you early learnings, and now you take it and you scale. You go to a bigger platform, you go mass market with it. And generally speaking, you've done your homework before you have to get the checkbook out and write those bigger checks.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that you both have hit on all of like the big pieces here, but the balance just really depends on the brand's stage of growth and their measurement maturity. I think that we are seeing at Rockerbox, we're seeing like the mid-market digital first brands really lean heavily into CTV. And I think that's because it gives them that near real time, like feedback and optimization. And I think that that's really important. And Josh, it kind of speaks to what you were saying too. I mean, I think there is this like iteration that's happening. We do have a couple questions in the chat. So Michael asked, are brands doing more branding or calls to action? This feels like specifically a CTV question. I would say linear is still like very much a branding play, though obviously most linear ads do have some sort of call to action. I'd love your opinions on this, Josh, Armin, whoever wants to answer.
Yeah, from a connected television perspective, I think there's still the majority of brands are more of a brand feel. In other words, they don't have hard-hitting CTAs. The creative might be, obviously shorter in duration because of attention spans. Oftentimes, it's hard to get all of those performance elements through in a 30-second creative. Testimonials or product shots or benefit features, right? All of the things that we look for in performance creative, kind of hard to do in shorter creative length. Although the consumer for CTV has a shorter attention span. So running longer length creative there doesn't always yield better outcomes. So I think to answer it directly, there's a growing number of performance marketers that are trying to iterate creative and see how they can test and make CTV work. But by and large, it's still encompassed by the bigger enterprise brands.
Yeah, that's interesting. And Armin, I'll pass it to you. I think one thing I would just add to that is that we're still seeing this like swing on the consumer side as well. And I think the way that consumers are digesting CTV ads and linear ads is different today than it was 10 years ago. Well, obviously for CTV, but like for linear, it's different today than it was 10 years ago. And I'm interested to see like how this continues to evolve over the next couple of years, where some streaming platforms are offering longer spots, and like we're just seeing some like changes in the way that, I think even like from a device perspective, like where are the majority of CTV ads being consumed? Like, is it on smaller devices, or are we seeing more TV? We're seeing a huge drop in cable and the rise in CTV. And so I think there's like all of these, right? Like we're seeing a lot of variables happening at the same time. Armin, you're laughing. So I'd love to hear your point of view.
There's so many variables, right? But I think the interesting thing with CTV and linear is like, the assumption generally is that it's on the biggest screen in the house and it's on, but I think also that's a good thing, where the same way movies love to be on the big screen in a theater because it adds to the experience. Like I think it adds to the advertisers' cachet and credibility to be on that big screen and have that high quality, something that fits around or in the things that people are consuming on that screen. So you have to like have that quality there. But I also think that there's some opportunities to make sure that you're fitting the right format, because there is a bit more passive watching and listening to these ads. So I think partnering with the right experts to have that voiceover, that those call to actions, and some of the things that are are learnings from performance marketing embedded in your creative could give you a bigger opportunity than just a pure brand play where someone has to be both eyes on the big screen. Because we all do it where you have it on and then you're on your phone too. So I think having that clever approach and having that expert guidance, I think will help companies really get the most out of that investment to dip their toe into the call to action, even on CTV and linear ads.
Yeah, that makes sense. So we had another question in the chat before we move on to the next panel question. How will the CTV advertising market evolve in 2026 and beyond? How is the industry shifting from upper funnel awareness to lower funnel action, conversion, and CTV environments? And what new functions and impact will performance marketing have in the CTV world? I think this is really interesting. This is really similar to what we were just talking about. And so I think some of this we've answered already. But CTV is definitely an emerging performance channel. I think we're hearing that more and more. And it's not, I think that there was a time where it was like, oh, performance marketers are kind of testing this. And now it's like, oh, this is a performance channel for some of these brands, especially the brands that are digital first and scaling now in the upper mid-market enterprise space. This is how they've won. I'm thinking like the emerging brands, right? That have scaled really quickly. They're the ones who are kind of taking this as a performance channel and really pressing into it. But I'd love any other notes you two want to add as well.
Yeah, I think the future in CTV is a really interesting concept because as we're seeing this migration or an increase of users, right? Monthly uniques, they're always growing. As my parents have continued to age along with me, they're on CTV, right? So we're even expanding the demographics in CTV and just the consumer's ability to use it and understanding of how it works. Where is your consumer at? What is your first party data showing you? Do you have customers that are already in your CRM system? And is that information or is that data being used to drive strategy? Right? We used to do old mosaics and Experian polls for linear TV to understand, like, what do these cohorts look like? All right. Now we can use actual CRM data, first party customer data, to create lookalike models, to do things that are more advanced, more digital-like in a television space. And I think that is where the audience is going to be very, very targeted. If you're a consumer that has a need for a certain type of a product, you want that ad to be shown to you. You want relevance. And as brands start to tap into their own data and use that to build cohort groups and audience groups to target against, let the attribution, let the results dictate where the money goes, right? I think there's an underutilization of this data for the most part today, but I think it's gaining traction and will be more prevalent as we move forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
The couple of things to add to that is typically you're buying CTV through a programmatic DSP. So, that gives you access to that same audience within other formats too. And I know our discussion is around linear and TV, but whether it's audio or podcasts or even like the static ads that a programmatic gives you access to, I think that collection of touch points could lead to that conversion that you're seeking. So I think the activity of buying is an interesting diversion away from upper and lower funnel. It's just really creating a consistent, recognizable theme. So within the flood of information coming at a consumer, that consistent messaging can be, could deliver that message repeatedly to a point where that conversion and that brand affinity is created. And then the second thing is, like, if you are a direct-to-consumer brand and they come to your website, how consistent is that experience with what they've seen prior? And so the investment in going through those funnels yourself and really understanding, like, if someone comes in and Googles you because they saw you on the big screen, you want that same messaging, that same offer. You don't want it to be confusing. You want it to be exactly the same in some cases to lead to that. So I think it's all encompassing and an opportunity to not necessarily think of a customer as a linear funnel, but ultimately tell a complete story across your personal owned channels, your upper funnel channels, and your programmatic buys in between.
Awesome. Yeah, I totally agree. Okay. And thank you for those questions in the chat. If you guys have any additional questions, please drop them in. All right, moving on to question number 3, which is really this like enterprise versus mid-market strategy. So we've seen enterprise brands take a dual channel approach, while mid-market advertisers often are prioritizing CTV. This is what we were just talking about, right? So I'd love for both of you, and we'll start, Josh, with you. What differences do you see in strategy, creative execution, and measurement across those two groups of the brands that you work with?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, budget is a constraining factor when you think about enterprise brands versus startups or mid-market, right? It really is a big factor here. So enterprise generally has more weight behind it, and they can afford dual channel. They can afford a really multi-generational approach. If it's a CPG product or something, and they've got 18-year-old consumers and they've got 78-year-old consumers, right? There's a need to sort of be everywhere all the time. And I think that is important for people to know, because when there's enterprise money that's in market, again, I said it before, but there's always liability attached to it, right? These are dollars that are planned for 6, 9, 12 months of the year. They are kind of set and forget. And then the networks are now kind of just trying to deliver. They're trying to reach those goals. That creates volatility in the space. Mid-market companies can take advantage of this volatility. And what I mean by that is, as liability goes down or viewership goes up, numbers are being hit on the general market side. These enterprise companies are hitting their goals, generally speaking, on the fly, which opens up inventory for performance marketers or mid-market companies. So knowing what's happening in the marketplace, having a partner in an agency or a service provider that can give you insights is really important here. Mid-market generally relies heavier on accountability, measurement, and return on ad spend, right? I spent $1, what did I earn? It's this startup notion, or a smaller company that's trying to have accountability for every dollar they spend. This is generally geared toward more robust measurement, right? Deterministic measurement on digital platforms or connected television. Probabilistic measurement with companies like you, Ashley at Rockerbox, helping linear offline ad impressions connect with online sales. So, you in one umbrella, there's bigger money, there's bigger plays for audiences, and just being an awareness play, where in a mid or smaller size market, you have this really aggressive, tenacious, every dollar has to work. What am I getting for my investment? And I think that is more geared toward audience and very specific testing. So the creative on the enterprise side is going to be more bespoke creative, right? Very brand forward, right? Nice, beautiful creative that is about love our brand, love our messaging. And in the mid-market, it's telling the consumer, come to me, come check us out. So there's these different strategies and tactics that happen on both sides. But at the end of the day, enterprise blends CTV for precision and reach, and then mid-market is really looking at, what is my result? Where am I at today? What results can I carry into next quarter and next year based on my previous learnings, so that I can start to scale and reach toward those larger enterprise companies?
Yeah, that's very interesting industry context, Josh. There, it really helps paint the picture. Conversely, my perspective is, internally like the resources that you speak of and the budget you speak of is also a constraint on the mid-market side, on the resources they have for creative generation, and so the pressure that you're describing is not just within the media buying space, but as an organization as a whole. So they have to make smarter bets, and they have to make a clear strategic approach to ultimately to scale to that degree. And so I think that's where an exciting opportunity right now is around, what we touched on earlier, AI generated ads and some of the opportunities you have to operationally scale while keeping overhead consistent or reasonable within your constraints. And so I think that's where mid-market companies might have a bit of an advantage, is fewer chefs in the kitchen, fewer departmental thing. And I won't name any names, but I've seen enterprise companies where the turnaround time on an insight is 2 to 3 months, and you're like, and that volatility that Josh and I have been speaking of taking advantage of is gone. It's fleeting, right? It's not gonna, if you're gonna take 3 months to turn around the creative and get all the approvals, then you're gonna miss the opportunity. And so, I think mid-market companies that take advantage of the higher capacity that they can generate with technology while making the most of their agility as a competitive advantage, have that like key opportunity to really take advantage and really scale and outcompete enterprise companies that may have a little bit of that friction and inertia within their organization.
Yeah. That's really interesting. And I feel like and it's true, right? The larger the organization, the more difficult those pivots and the insights even become to like implement. Things just do take a lot longer. And I think there's like another side of this question, which is that when I think about like our enterprise customers and what they're optimizing for, a lot of the times it is consistency. It's kind of what you're talking about, Armin, with ensuring creative alignment across linear and CTV and digital. And a lot of the times they're using, they're measuring these things from like an MMM perspective versus an MTA perspective. Like they're really looking at like the big picture a little bit more directly. Because the questions that they're trying to answer are answered best in that way. And so it's really like they want that like consistent growth, because they've already gotten to that stage where they do have a large percentage of market share, and they're not really focused on just the next conversion, right? And the way that maybe a scaling company in the mid-market is. And I think like to that point, like the mid-market advertisers, on the other hand, are really optimizing for agility, and they're leveraging CTV as a performance channel. Like this goes back to like who's on linear and who's on CTV. I do think there's more of a mix, and like we're seeing this like middle ground. But like we're seeing these mid-market brands testing creative, validating lift, reallocating budget quickly in a way that their larger counterparts maybe just can't. And a lot of that is based on the data that they're seeing, right? And in the measurement that they've invested in, and where they're kind of, I think it's like the biggest difference isn't necessarily sophistication, because a lot of the time these teams are equally as sophisticated, right? And their strategies are equally as sophisticated, but really it's the speed. And so Armin, like to your point, like that, enterprise brands, they have the scale, but mid-market brands have the flexibility and they can just go fast.
Yeah.
Great. Oh, and it looks like we have another question in the chat. So Carson wants to know, how do you message the value of CTV to more mid-market level brands who haven't quite bought into the benefit of this channel type versus a tried and true revenue generator like search? That's a great question.
That's a good question.
Yeah,
Armin kind of hit on that already, I think, in terms of like incremental testing, match market, holdout groups. Dip your toe, I think is his words, and it couldn't be more true. With mid-market companies trying to measure everything against their organic digital native numbers, right? Search, Google, whatever it is, Meta even. How do you start to chip away at that? And from a buy-in perspective, how does a brand show the efficacy of a channel? Those are the questions I think that's underlying in that initial question. So think about the cost to buy search, right? It's very cheap. It's you can spend dollars a day. It's not that big of a lift. CTV is going to be a little bit more expensive, maybe 3 to 4 times that. If you're starting to identify holdout groups where you can expose ads in certain homes and have a control group of homes that don't get the ads, and measure incrementality, whether it be from top of funnel, mid funnel, or bottom. Any of these little signals are what you're going to use to take back to CMOs and board members to show efficacy of the channel. So how does CTV become something, scalable or valuable for a company that's sort of a digital native? And I think you don't forego everything you've learned. You take those ideas, you apply them into the CTV space, and really you just measure on signal. This is about signal, and really the creative iterations, the A/B testing, all of that sort of comes after you've identified that connected television has my consumer, my target audience is there. I see some value in it. How do I now reiterate to make this a moneymaker? How do I make it compete with my best performing channels? And I think it comes down to strategy testing and doing it pragmatically. You don't jump in with both feet. You put your toe in.
Yeah. And I think, not to take issue with Carson's question, but I think calling search a true revenue generator, is potentially giving it too much credit. Like someone had to search and find you. And so, I think the opportunity with CTV is that awareness, that demand generation, and some of that demand is going to get converted through search. And so, it's making sure that your MTA and your media mix model, if you're at that scale, is appropriately telling you where that demand is being generated, especially that incremental demand, right? So I think the opportunity, yes, is test and prove it out, but ultimately make sure you're measuring the right thing, and that hopefully your CTV is raising all boats.
Yeah.
And it's coming in through these other channels that you should continue to scale up in accordance to your CTV investment.
Yeah.
It's a great observation, Armin. I can't tell you how many times we have to tell clients and talk about the correlation between impressions in market and paid brand search. There is a direct spike correlation every time you do it. And consumers just sort of click on the ads or the results that are sort of at the top. Generally speaking, there's UTM parameters and trackability. So search is like this Hoover vacuum cleaner, right? That's taking credit for a lot of the leads or for a lot of the interest that is driven by other mass channels. So we see it and we talk about it nearly daily in our industry.
Yeah. And I mean, that's why Rockerbox pushes attribution, right? Like we know that every channel is going to take credit. Every channel wants to take credit for all of your conversions. You're going to see it on Meta. You're going to see it on search. And the reality is they could have been influenced by other channels. So really understanding that path to conversion is important, especially for brands. But I think the only thing I would add to what you two gentlemen have shared is if you're trying to convince mid-market brands that they need to test a new channel, I think it really comes down to this idea of diminishing returns on their existing channels and when to test and try something new. Because yes, to Josh's point, dip your toe in, you should be trying something. But at some point, if you want to grow and you want to scale, you have to expand your channel mix. Meta's only going to get you so far. Search is only going to get you so far. And so I think if you're talking to brands or if we're talking to brands and we, and they're asking how can I grow? How can I grow? Test new channels, try something new, make sure you have measurement in place to really understand the impact of those channels. Don't just go test blindly. But CTV has lowered the threshold so dramatically. And to Armin's point, with AI generated content, you can really test CTV with a much lower investment than you've ever been able to test a channel like that historically. So 2025 going into 2026 is a great time to be in a position to want to test out CTV. And it's also something that is intimidating for a lot of brands who are just kind of finding their footing in the upper mid market. Maybe they scaled really quickly through I'm thinking D2C brands who have scaled really quickly on search and social, and they're just starting to get to this point where they're okay, now I'm competing against some true enterprise brands. How do I start to enter that conversation? This is more viable than it's ever been before. And so test new channels, make sure you have the right tracking in place to be able to really understand your user path to conversion. But at the end of the day, that is going to be the best way to scale, is to diversify your media mix. And we could probably have a whole conversation about diversification, but that would be the only thing I would add to that. All right. And great conversation so far. I appreciate you all engaging in the chat. So moving on to number 4, this is really the measurement and accountability, which is what we've been talking about. But with performance scrutiny higher than ever, how are leading marketers connecting their TV investment, both across linear and streaming, to measurable business outcomes? And what role does this concept of unified measurement play? And I'll kind of give like a contextual input here. When we say unified measurement, a lot of the times from a Rockerbox perspective, we're talking about looking at your measurement via multiple lenses versus just MTA or just MMM or just incrementality testing. We're talking about this like marriage of these methodologies in a way that allows you to answer the right question with the right methodology, because you have a data foundation that is solid enough and common taxonomy across all of the data inputs that you can then model on top of it to answer a variety of business questions. So with that context, Armin, I'd love to pass this one to you.
Yeah, this is a good plug for Rockerbox here, with definitely both across online and offline channels being brought into the same platform. So oftentimes you get stuck in a world where even if you've unified your data, it's still a challenge to deduplicate some of these touch points across channels. So I think that's really a requirement to be able to do that. But I think, I believe that most people are familiar with that. The one component that I think is really valuable is the segmentation of customers too, where you look at new versus returning and reactivations. I think that becomes a really interesting data point for you to understand if CTV is now increasing both as attributed orders, but also is it increasing the new customers coming in from that channel? And is now your search customer base potentially more new customers once you started ramping up on your CTV and you have that and your linear. So I think, to me, that unified is really the foundation that you need to create, and then layer on top of a customer-centric view that gives you the insight of, are you driving that incremental new demand that is really the lifeline for your growth in the future.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Rockerbox has done a hell of a job just sort of taking away this black box of measurement of linear TV, right? It's been such a challenge for brands and even agencies that don't have their own measurement model. They don't have their own in-house data scientists or the ability to do it on their own. It's created a performance channel out of TV for many brands, where probabilistic modeling gives you signal on how to optimize. Now, I think it's important for advertisers to really have an understanding of what their baselines are. Anytime you talk about measurement, there is this fighting over who gets credit, right? We see it all the time. So the advertiser themselves having a really strong hold on what baselines look like, and then testing incrementality above baseline, is a way to sort of internally verify and justify some of the attribution models that we use on a daily basis, right? Because we are the buyers optimizing to signal. And over time, all those optimizations should show incremental growth. And we use regression models. We use different types of science to validate the moves we make on a daily basis in longer term spans. So I think, again, it is a nod to Rockerbox providing this service for folks to be able to put all of their data into one source, to look at what we'll call a single source of truth, and be able to sort of measure CTV and linear buys in one view and know what they're getting out of their media dollar. So I don't know that measurement is going to get any better over time. I mean, we have to really start to think about human psyche and how technology will advance. But it's best in class today and is proving signal at the beginning of our campaigns and all the way through to maturation. It's just, you have to have measurement in place, and you have to use those signals and act on them quickly. That's the best recommendation I think we can make for brands that are trying to get into the space or understand how to stay in it and scale.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, connecting that linear and CTV exposure data with your site visits and your conversions, and then analyzing that alongside all of the other channels in the media mix, it really is just going to create such a better rounded consumer experience at the end of the day. Because when you understand how your channels are interacting with each other, you can then cater your creative to the stage of the funnel that those people are in while they're interacting with your media across different channels. And so I think we talked about layering methodologies, but like MTA is going to be that user level pathing, like where are your consumers engaging? MMM is going to be that longer term trends, like really taking a step back and looking at your media as it engages with your business outcomes. And then to Josh's point, like the testing and incrementality definitely plays a role in really being that causal piece. So, obviously from our perspective, we think that all of these methodologies play a really critical role. But at the end of the day, like my recommendation would be just start tracking somewhere. Make sure that you are tracking something, whether it's with Rockerbox, which we would love, if you're an upper mid-market or enterprise brand, or if you don't feel like you're quite there yet and you don't need that level of data, making sure that you're collecting all of these insights and looking at your performance across all of the channels you're advertising on is going to be important, especially as you start to layer in your investment with your business performance. Because the worst thing that can happen, right, is like you sit there and you're in a board meeting and you say, oh, but my CPA is fill in the blank. And everybody goes, well, that's great. But, our business, like our business is not where it should be. Like we need more than that. And so like all we're trying to get to here, I think across the board, is like just really understanding the way that your advertising impacts your bottom line is really important. And that we could probably have another conversation on which types of metrics you should be tracking.
That's a different one.
It's a different
Yeah.
All right. So we've got 2 more questions. I know we only have 10 more minutes, or 3 more questions, sorry, 10 more minutes. If you in the audience have additional questions that you'd like us to prioritize, please drop those in the chat. We will continue trucking away, and we will save the time, and in 9 minutes we'll cut this off. But we would love to, I think I speak for Josh and Armin, if you all have additional questions after this, we will make ourselves available. We'd love to continue the conversation. So question number 5, the brands winning in 2025 are those who are adapting fast. What does omni-channel agility look like in practice, from campaign planning to optimization and reporting? And Armin, I'm going to pass this to you, because though you are not on the brand side right now, you've spent a lot of your career on the brand side, which maybe we buried the lead a little bit. And Armin is a past Rockerbox customer, so he's used Rockerbox on the brand side. But I'd love to know, like, how did you approach this from a brand perspective, and how are you talking to brands today?
Yeah, I think it's an evolution. So, we started with the prior question saying that you need that unified data foundation. And so that's where you're describing what happened in the past. And I think once you've created that and you're comfortable with that, you're counting the things accurately, then you can start getting into prediction. And so as soon as you get into prediction is where now you could be even faster in your adaptations and your strategies, because you're not reacting to what has happened, but now you're reacting to how things are going versus your prediction. And so that's where I think you can set up tripwires to take action at certain thresholds. If things are scaling well during next month's Black Friday or end of this month's Black Friday, that's when you could ultimately be in position to scale up. And so I think it really starts with that unification at first, then becoming predictive either through AI tools or even back of the envelope type things that give you a perspective on what you expect to happen next week, next month, and then creating these strategies and these action plans around different thresholds is going to give you the opportunity to really optimize quickly to take advantage of those green shoots and avoid the trappings of spending too long into something that isn't working.
Definitely. Yeah, that's a good point, Armin. We, as an agency, as a buyer, this is what we do. We take our learnings, we look at historical trends and performances, and we pivot. We make a change. this is pivoting in a structured adaptability way. It's not chaos, right? I talk about signal, whether it's top of funnel, mid funnel, bottom of funnel. When we have results, when we have something to measure against, right? A champion and a challenger. The dollars need to flow where the data is telling the dollars to flow, essentially. And it's not about canceling budget out of linear to fund CTV. It's about a mix. And how do we use both of them in a way that the signals strengthen and that the results improve? And I think that's a really big part of the word agility and the nimbleness and the flexibility. You can't forego your strategic intent when you do this, right? So it's not like, oh, the younger audience isn't working for us, so that's not a customer of ours. Well, if you're on linear TV and your younger audience or your CRM is 45 plus, it's probably biased because of where you're marketing. And so as an advertiser and agency, it's our jobs to sort of identify new cohort groups, and maybe that's on other channels. And maybe that's not in the same network groups or what we've done for the core of the business. So testing into identifying signals and then basically exploiting those signals without sacrificing the overall intent or strategic goal of the campaign is the perfect balance. Because omni-channel is important, more important to massive enterprise brands, but important to mid-market and growing brands. Because you have to identify your verticals that are going to be your best performers and start to migrate more into those. I think there's not a one size fits all here either. It is very case by case. And in some cases, we have brands that are only on CTV or only in display or only in linear. And it's because of their core composition. It's their creative, their messaging, and they're at the end of the day, they're consumers. So I think it's about speed with strategy, moving dollars where they matter most, guided by data.
Yeah, 100%. I'm gonna slide us right on through to question number 6. So as targeting capabilities continue to evolve, especially within CTV, how are advertisers thinking differently about creative testing and audience segmentation across TV formats? So this kind of throws us back to a little bit of the conversation that we had earlier. But I do think it's worth us kind of speaking a little bit more directly here. It is a lot easier to directly target the same people who you're engaging with across other channels. So how do you think about this? And Josh, I'll pass it to you first.
Yeah, it's a few layers for me. I think you can think about CTV as incremental, right? Consumers that saw my ad on linear, exclude them, don't use them, don't target them, right? We can use CTV to really just kind of go incremental. And that's important because on an audience first basis, you need to not only think about or know who your core consumer is, but you also want to think about your current existing CRM, people that have already come to you, you already have their first party data. How does this teach you what creative messaging to use? How does this teach you about include or exclude these types of cohorts based on my data? We think about lifetime value a lot at Direct Avenue and what channels drive more lifetime value. We have to rely on advertisers' first-party data to understand that data and to back it into the media which generated it. So there's this enabled first-party creative that we have, messaging specific to certain cohort groups. I'll give you an example. We run a linear TV campaign that's very high top of funnel, beautiful ad, drives people to websites. Once people get to the website and they don't fill out a form or become a paying customer, we want to remarket to them. And we usually use that via CTV because it's very targeted one-to-one. And we can use specific creative that's kind of like a save the sale, right? Where you iterate on creative that then pulls that conversion out, even though this is a consumer that you've already shown ads to in linear, they've expressed intent, and now you want to really pull that down the bottom of the funnel. So I think CTV is a creative and a performance lever that is personalized, it's tested and vetted, and does really, it's optimized sometimes on the fly without humans touching it even.
Yeah.
Pretty awesome. Yeah, I think the one, we kind of touched on this earlier. So the one additional point that I would make here is around creative testing. I think using AI to create metadata to describe the creatives that you've run in the past could really give you a more objective or a more consistent way of describing your creative. So rather than you watching it as a human and saying, oh, I think the hook was great on this, being more methodical about the way that AI can help you describe creative and compare against one another, it could be really powerful to take data that you already have and ultimately make it more useful to you in the forward-looking testing that you're going to do. So I would really recommend to organizations to start there and then evolve into a more proactive testing, but ultimately learn as much as you can from the past.
Yeah. And I know we are right at time. So just really quick thoughts for both of you. What would be your one quick piece of advice as these brands and these marketers are heading into 2026 as it relates to linear and CTV? Rapid fire. Go, Armin.
Unified measurement.
Okay. Gosh, I will co-sign that. Unified measurement.
Labeling goals, knowing that every vertical, every system kind of has their own goal definitions. Let's streamline all that, folks. Let's make sure that an apple's an apple's, an orange and orange, no matter what platform it comes from, so that we can have good data in and good data out.
100%.
That's it.
Yeah, and I think CTV is growing, and as it should, but don't ignore some of the opportunities on legacy channels like linear. And I think the combination of all that should yield growth for organizations that internally set themselves up for success.
Awesome. Thank you both for joining today. Thank you, everyone in the audience, for participation. We really appreciate partnering with Direct Avenue and having Josh here. Again, apologies on that first slide. I will make that tweak before we send this out to everyone who registered. If you're watching this later, we want you to know that if you have any questions or you want to talk more, both to Direct Avenue, Rockerbox, or Armin, you can reach out to us. What is the best way to get a hold of both of you?
You can find me on LinkedIn or find me on SmartData Analytics AI.
You can find me on LinkedIn or at directavenue.com.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, everybody. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
All right.
Be well.